G'day everyone. I just wanted to do a bit of a follow-up video on my last sort of video where I did do you have a plan, or who are you in strongman, or who are you outside of strongman? And I want to do one a bit about risks of strongman and risk of the sport that we do. There's a risk in everything we do. There's a risk in playing AFL, there's a risk in playing NFL, there's a risk in playing NRL, there's risks in everything you do. You walk out your front door, you could get hit by a bus or a car. There's always a risk, and it's about understanding those risks inside a sport, and especially a sport like strongman that has gone from being a very niche sport for a lot of athletes that are, I guess you look at initial world's strongest man and stuff like that, it's ex-gridiron players, ex-powerlifters, ex-weightlifters, ex-strength athletes, now to being kind of a sport that everyone kind of does now. So it has changed a lot over the past goodness knows how long. That it's been obviously televised since the 70s, and then obviously prior to that with the old circus strongman days, and then prior to that being back in our, I guess, our forefathers and forefathers and our families thousands of years ago doing tests of strength for manhood and all that type of stuff. So the sport has changed a lot, but the sport as we talk about today, I guess it's one of those things where I think a whole lot of guys these days don't necessarily understand the risk of getting into the sport, and also the risks of trying to become a professional and to really reach that high end. Like any sport, when you go and push yourself as hard as humanly possible, the risk of injury, risk of getting hurt is a lot higher. And again, that was what I was kind of getting at in my last video, is do you have anything in place if you get injured? What do you have in place for that? Do you have private health, etc., etc.? But I guess now summing up to a whole lot of athletes that are maybe starting the sport or getting into it or wanting to learn more about, is learn the risks and of strongman is that injuries are very likely, but it's not necessarily the injuries while you do the sport. I was very lucky to be schooled by legendary strongman Mr. Bill Linden, also schooled by guys like Grant Edwards, also by David Huxley, by Craig Reed, by a whole lot of other old school guys about understanding that injuries happen in your career, but also when you retire, you do 10, 20 years of training, your body tends to take an absolute pounding. So surgeries might not just happen while you have your career. When you're in your 50s and 60s, what type of shape will your body be in after years and years of pushing it? I see a whole lot of these guys that again schooled me through many, many years of strongman as a competitor, and then obviously now into the show stuff. But they're all going through hip surgeries, knee surgeries, shoulder surgeries, just because of years of wear and tear on their body. And I don't think a lot of athletes really understand that. That it's not necessarily, let's say like myself, who's torn my bicep off, I'm recovering at the moment, which is not necessarily that bad an injury. It's a 6 to 8 week injury and I'm back in training again. So it's a rest period almost. But it's injuries like shoulders and pecs and stuff like that. When you really do that injury, you're retired then and there. But then when you retire, it may be 10 years down the track of when you start to slow down, as we all have to one day, that you realize that your hips are buggered and that you're having to get surgery on your hip. And this is again where I was talking about making sure you've got health insurance, because you're going to need that in the future. I think a lot of athletes come into the sport thinking that I think a lot of athletes just like the idea of being a strongman rather than actually being a strongman. Social media, I think everyone likes to put strongman in front of their name and all that type of stuff. But again, as the sport grows, that's how things tend to happen. And I think social media has done great things for the sport. It's done interesting things for the sport, and it's done some crappy things for the sport as well. But, in a way, it has helped get the sport out there to a whole lot of very talented athletes coming through. But I guess this is kind of not a dig at anything, but it's just more of a reality check for athletes to really think about, not necessarily the injuries through their career or the risks in their career while they're doing the sport, but maybe when you've retired and what goes on after. So this is where you've got to sort of sit down and chat to the guys that have been there and done it, the top pro guys. And again, this is me just going out and saying names from in Australia. So I guess if you're sort of living in Melbourne and stuff like that, it's chatting to guys like Bill Linden, who was around for many, many years as one of the best strongmen in the world at one point. Guys like Warwick Brun and Derek Boyer from Queensland. guys like Craig Reed and David Huxley from New South Wales, and guys like Matt Van Berniggen and Jeremy Hogg from WA. But then there's a whole lot of other guys that are, I guess, around my period of time. Guys like Dan Mackery, who's retired and was probably one of the strongest guys ever in Australia, tore his pec off. Probably the most talented young guy coming through that I've ever seen. Guys like Luke Reynolds, who's had more injuries than I had hot dinners. Guys that have had injuries and stuff like that, that'll probably have surgeries later in their lives as well from just pushing themselves so hard. So look, again, this is not trying to tell people not to do the sport, but it's kind of me to just give guys a reality check. If you're really wanting to be a top pro athlete, the risks you have to take in the sense of injuries and recovery, and just, making sure that you understand what you have to do to become a top level pro. The guys give everything in their lives. I use James Newbury as an example. As a top CrossFitter, this guy wakes up in the morning, he does recovery 4 times a day, he trains 4 times a day. He is so good because his recovery is so good. He probably trains as hard as the other guys do, but his recovery is better than theirs. That's why he's as good as he is. So, to be a top pro, there are so many boxes you have to tick. And, it's one of those things where the risks and rewards are something that you just have to weigh up. And look, I'm going to do some more videos on this. I just want to just have a chat about more, just maybe chatting to the guys that have been there and done it before, because they have a lot of wisdom and a lot of stories to tell and ways to help you guys understand what it takes to get to that top level and what it is like at that top level. I might do another video on my time as competing as a pro, and just to explain a few little, nuances behind the scenes stuff. Just through my career, I was very lucky to do my first pro show at 21. I was the youngest pro in Australia, or still the youngest person to turn pro in Australia. Myself and Ed Hall both did our first pro show together in Melbourne. So again, I've known Ed for many years. Again, there's always a lot of risk and reward. And like I said, I think a lot of guys that come into sport just like the idea of the Instagram posts and the Facebook posts that they're a strong man. And hey, look, and that's fine if that's what you want out of your career. More than happy to see you do whatever you want to do, because it's your life. You do whatever you need to. But again, just understand the risks and understand that you can get hurt. And it can be an issue that could be with you for longer than you think. It's not just a wham bam fix issue. You got to think about your life after the sport and what is your future going to be like versus now being happy, healthy, and whatever, and then lifting for many years and seeing what you're like at the end. So look, like I said, I might do another video in regards to what it is like being a pro, what you have to do as a pro, and I might just get into maybe a little bit more in depth into the behind the scenes stuff at worlds and world level competitions as a pro heavyweight, and just give you guys a bit of an idea of I guess the next step from there, understanding the risk and then going to that next level, because it's it's something very different that people will maybe not really understand until you get there. I remember when I was an 18-year-old, 19-year-old thinking I was going to win World's Strongest Man one day. And, that was always the goal as a young guy. And then I did my first pro show and then understood how the real world worked. And then I went to Russia a few times and understand the real world worked in that. So I've been very lucky to be taught and see how things really work in the world. And it's not quite what people think it is. So look, guys, I hope that was good. If there's any questions, please shoot them below in the comments section. Happy to answer anything I can. And yeah, look, like I said, risks in strongman, these are just a few in regards to injuries and what happens after you finish. I hope this has been a little bit of enlightenment to you guys, and yeah, a few more videos to come. Cheers, have a great day. Bye.